G'day mates. So I wanted to grab you all really quickly just before the video starts. Firstly, I want to give a big shout out to everyone who sent their stories in. Thank you all so much for sharing your stories with me. If your story did not make it, don't worry though guys, there'll be plenty more subscribers videos to come and your one might make it later. Also, I just wanted to let everyone know that because the channel is growing so fast, I want to try and organise a special video thanking all of you for if I ever reach 100,000 subscribers. And in order to do this, I'll need you guys to send me a picture of you. You can be creative, hold up signs, make funny faces, get together in groups, whatever you like. Just provide a nice picture of yourself. Thank you to everyone who has already sent their photos in. I've had a pretty massive response already and had hundreds of photos coming in, so thank you to all who have already sent their photos in. And if you guys want to get in on the action, then be sure to send me a photo quickly guys, as who knows when this 100k might come up. This video is about celebrating you guys and the amazing support you continue to provide me and this channel. So yeah guys, I'll leave the link in the description below to my email so that you can send me your stories and a picture of you. So with all that out of the way guys, let's begin. Number 20. So, I was 17 years old. My then boyfriend and I were out on a farm access road. Only one way in and out. It was November, it wasn't really cold, but it was cloudy. I had my window rolled down a few inches because Bob was having a cigarette while trying to find something decent on the radio. I was sitting cross-legged with my back against the passenger door. On both sides of us was empty fields because it was past harvest. I happened to look out the back driver's seat window and saw the silhouette of two men who looked like they were carrying rifles. When they saw me looking at them, they moved to the rear of the car and ducked behind it. I should have heard the footsteps on the gravel with my window being opened, and I heard nothing though. I went ballistic. I started locking car doors and screaming for Bob to start the engine. I never took my eyes off the rear of the car. At first he thought I was dicking with him and laughed, but the panic in my voice got him motivated. I screamed, "There are two guys out there, and I think they have guns." He turned on the lights and started to peel out of there. I fully expected to see two guys eating our dust and cursing us out at the taillights, but nothing was there. At the end of the road, Bob stopped and asked what the hell that was all about. I could barely talk, but told him what I saw. He'd been coming to this place for years with girls and nothing ever happened. I said maybe it was the farmer with another man and they were trying to scare us. He said this wasn't possible because he knew the farmer, and had it been him he would have driven down the same road we were on. He lived too far away to chance walking across fields at night with no flashlights. I said, could it be illegal hunters? He said all the land was posted for no hunting because there were homes scattered along the main road that led to the access road. If they fired weapons, someone would hear them and call the police. There would have been no reason for them to run or hide from us. We were two teens in a car and they were grown men with weapons. I was very shaken and Bob took me home. I mulled it over in my mind trying to find a rational explanation. Bob never saw anything, so obviously he doubted my story. We stopped dating after that night. I think I scared the hell out of him. So what did I see? Damned if I know, but I can tell you I saw it. I'm now 62 years old, and I can't remember ever being that scared before or since. Something was not right about those things that I saw. They were blacker than the night and distinctively solid, but I could see no facial features. Their movements were jerky and uncoordinated, yet they made no sound. I wouldn't even be repeating this story if not for finding a few stories like this 45 years after the fact on the internet. Just for the record, we were not drinking or smoking weed or doing any mind-altering drugs. Did I matrix the whole thing? I could have, but around here kids always hung out in the farmlands or mountains, and I was one of them, and never encountered anything like that night. Number 19. Here's what happened to me one night. When I was around 15 last year, I was at home, alone with my friend. Keep in mind, I live in Canada and we don't have very much crime in the city where I live. It was around 1 in the morning. I was, and still am, very paranoid about people breaking into my house or doing something to harm me. I always kept a knife handy or some sort of a baton. My friend and I were playing Xbox upstairs, and after a while of not eating, we decided to go downstairs to get something to eat and drink. This was a big mistake. It was dark in the hallway, the only light switch being 10 feet away. Me being paranoid, I brought my baton and knife with me downstairs. I turned on the light and we proceeded to head downstairs, and when we got to the bottom it was pitch black. We couldn't see a thing. We bumped into things trying to find the light switch, and after a minute or so of hitting our toes on tables and couches, we found the light switch and turned it on. I always felt safe with the lights on, and I placed my baton and knife on the kitchen table and we went to the fridge to get some pop. But then we heard a tapping noise coming from the window, I'd say 15 feet away from us across the room. I gave my friend my knife and got my baton, and we thought it may have been the 17-year-old that lives beside us that scares us every so often. So we said... We continued to hear this noise though, and I got a little scared, so I gripped my baton really hard. We heard a really loud bang on the window, and I knew right then it wasn't Dylan. We bolted upstairs and didn't even grab what we came down for, we were that scared. We jumped up the stairs while running, and we almost ran into the door, but I got myself to stop before the door. We opened it and shut it extremely fast and then locked the door from the inside. I then proceeded to get on the phone to call my dad's friend, which is a police officer 5 houses down from us. But the portable phone wasn't charged. I thought we were going to die because we couldn't call the police. I just remembered that my dad has a handgun under his bed, so I slowly opened the door and ran to his bedroom. Not even turning on the lights, I grabbed the lock cases and the key and bolt back into my room. I frantically try and open it, and I got it open. I took out the gun and loaded it with the magazine. I cocked it back while I looked out my bedroom window to find a man standing there. He was smiling. This scared the shit out of us. We yelled at him to get the fuck out of our property before we grab our guns and shoot him. I pointed my dad's pistol out at the window, right at him. I really did not want to have to shoot someone. My hand was shaking so hard that I probably couldn't even hit him if I wanted to. It was very easy to see us from the window because we have the light on, so it was clear to him I had a gun. He ran into the surrounding woods by my house. My friend and I told my parents about this, and this scared the shit out of them. They called the police and told them what happened. They caught the guy breaking into another house a week later. The guy was caught after he had stabbed a woman who was living alone in the house. The police called me in for an interview and to see if I could identify who the guy was. He was the killer. He also confessed that he had killed other people before. I was absolutely terrified. Since then, my father bought me a firearm and put it in a secure location in my room. I hope I never have to use it though.
Number 18.
This is a creepy story that happened to my girlfriend. I had dropped my girlfriend off at her grandmother's place for the night. I got home, and like normal I sent her a text letting her know I made it home safely. I didn't get a response though. I figured she had just fallen asleep or got caught up talking to her grandmother, so I just shrugged it off. Maybe 20 minutes go by and I get a call from a very panicked girlfriend. She's saying how someone tried to break into the house. The guy never got in because the police were able to get there in time. When I asked just what happened, she said the following happened. Her grandmother came home at about 10:30 that night from a church function. My girlfriend was helping her grandmother unload groceries from the car. As my girlfriend was getting the bags from the trunk, out of nowhere this Hispanic guy in his early 20s was standing behind my girlfriend. He must have stood there for about 30 seconds, not saying anything. When my girlfriend turned around, she screamed, seeing the man with his big ear-to-ear grin across his face. He didn't say anything or move. He just stood there, towering over my girlfriend. She and her grandmother bolted to the door, leaving everything behind in the car. The man started going through the car as if he was looking for something. This went on for maybe a good 5 minutes. By then the cops were called. The man walked up to the door and started ringing the doorbell and knocking on the door. He was saying how he knew them and he just wanted to talk, all while having that big ear-to-ear grin across his face. The next part is just really odd. He laid down in front of the door and actually went to sleep. Another 5 minutes go by and now the cops are at my girlfriend's place. The cops arrested him and started asking me questions, as well as my girlfriend and her grandmother. While the cops are getting statements from my girlfriend and her grandmother, the Hispanic man just had that ear-to-ear smile as he looked back at my girlfriend. The cops place the man in the back of the cop car and drive away. As my girlfriend watches the car drive away, the man still has that smile on his face. I don't want to even think about what could have happened if things got even worse.
Number 70.
I started working in a nursing home in my hometown when I was 18. I was one of the youngest nurses' assistants on my shift, and needless to say, I was the one that got pranked and scared shitless during the whole shift. I worked 2 to 10 and many times 10 to 6 since I was young and had no life at the time. I didn't mind, the money was good, and I loved the people. One night, we had a woman go a little batshit crazy. I'll call her Norma. She was one of my favourites, and I was the one she always called for when she needed something, like a bath or just a regular conversation. She started walking the halls with her Bible, trying to get out, even went as far as biting some of my co-workers, and I was the only one that could get her back in her room and back to bed. One day, I came into work, and my boss informed me that she had to go away to an institution. He said that they couldn't get her in the van, and I seemed to be their go-to person when it came to convincing someone to do something, since all the residents seemed to love me. I don't know why, maybe it was because I was young and sweet at the time. I went to her room and told her she needed to go and it was going to be okay and that I would see her very soon again. She went, and weeks went by, and one day my boss called me into her office to tell me Norma passed away from kidney failure. I was sad and put it on the back of my mind and went on with work. About 4 months later, one of the lights to her old room went off. A new lady was in there and she never talked to me before since I had been off for about a week with personal issues. So she didn't know me at all and I hadn't been to her room that day. I was passing out ice when one of my co-workers came around the corner with a very pale face and wide eyes. I looked at her and said, "What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost." She said, "I think I did." I said, "You're not going to get me that easy today." She said, "No, the lady in Norma's old room asked for you by name and wants to tell you something." I just laughed and said, "You're not funny." She said, "No, I'll go with you, but you have to go." So I went, expecting they must have put this poor woman up to something. As I walked in the room, I said, "Yes, Mrs. Anna, what can I help you with?" She said, "I was talking to a lady named Norma and she wanted me to tell you something." I looked at my co-worker who was clearly not smiling, but standing in horror, when she said Norma wanted me to tell you she is back and she misses you. She said she used to live in this room and that was her chair and she just wanted to come see you, but when I got back from the restroom she was gone. I gave her a look of, "What the fuck?" And she said, "What's wrong, dear? I thought you would be happy to see her again." I said, "I'll be right back," and I closed her door and said to my co-worker, "You're not fucking funny." She said, "Honey, I didn't do this." She wasn't one not to tell me when she was playing a trick, and I never went back to inform the lady that Norma had passed away a few months ago. I came to find out that while I was on my week off, about 2 days after the lady had arrived, she started asking if she could speak to me by my name. Again, I had never met her or seen this lady in my life, and I avoided that room as much as possible. I even had the lady's shower schedule changed to in the mornings and not evenings when I worked.
Number 16.
I worked as a dietary aide in the cafeteria at 18 years old. It was my first job and overall I enjoyed my stay. The patients loved me a lot and I loved them too. Even if it was just handing them food for the day, it made me happy that they were happy. One time, we got this kid who was about my age. We'll call him N. He was Chinese and was so quiet you would think the guy was mute. He never ate and usually just sat alone in the cafeteria, even when I closed up. So one day, on movie night, I was closing up and he was just sitting there at a table again, alone. The lights were dim and overall the hospital was generally creepy at night. I asked him in my softest and most polite tone I could muster, "N, don't you want to join the others for movie night?" And then he stared at me. We stood there for what felt like forever. He was completely silent and motionless, and I was sweating from nervousness by now. His eyes were empty, as if he was zoning out while staring at me. Here I am, alone, with a patient whose sickness I had no idea what it was. I was a little scared for my life, as I felt a sense of dread coming over me. Then he stood up. He muttered something like, "Okay," and walked out. I never felt such relief in my life and hadn't realized I was holding my breath. The scary thing is that it turns out N suffered from severe schizophrenia and depression. He could not go into college because of his illness and behavior, resulting in his parents completely disowning him. It broke him even further, and I later realized why he was so quiet. He was never listening to me or real people. He was quiet because he was listening to all the voices in his head which would tell him to kill people, how to do it, and what to do with the body after. I was alone with a dangerous level schizophrenic who was listening to voices that were most likely telling him to kill me that entire time as we stared at each other. He discharged 2 days later, and he never returned to our facility. But I hope he's doing okay, wherever he is now.
Number 15.
Here's my story. 5 years ago, when I was 12, my sister was 14 and my younger cousin was 3, and something strange happened to us. One night, the three of us were playing hide and seek. After a few games, it was our younger cousin's turn to come and find us. Like most young children, she couldn't stand being it, but we talked her into playing anyways. My sister's bedroom was downstairs and was the first room you saw coming down, as it was right across the stairwell. Between the stairs and my sister's room was a large storage closet to the left, which my father called the Devil's Room, because he loved to scare us by saying things like, "If you don't do the dishes now, you can sleep in the Devil's Room tonight." I now realize that this is kind of messed up. But anyway, to the right was the hallway, which consisted of 2 more bedrooms, a bathroom, and at the very end of the hallway was the laundry room. We always did our counting in my sister's bedroom, so our little cousin began counting. I ran to the end of the hall to hide in the laundry room, and my sister stayed in her bedroom and hid under her bed like a smartass. After a 30-second count, my cousin began looking for us and we could hear her walking around. After about half a minute, we hear her open the door to the Devil's Room, and I remember hearing her say, "Angel, what are you doing?" I'm a girl with pale skin, long dark hair, average height, and dark eyes that are nearly black. She said, "Angel, stop it, I found you." We hear her laughing, and her laugh quickly turns into a scream. I dart down the hallway, and in seconds, I'm carrying her into my sister's bedroom trying to cheer her up. She's crying and looks scared and confused. Then all she said was, "Angel wouldn't talk to me. She just looked at me and made an ugly face at me." My cousin began to cry even harder as I explained that I wasn't hiding in the closet. She asked who that was, and we told her we didn't know. Since this incident, a few other family members have recalled seeing this little girl and thinking it was me until she disappears into thin air.
Number 14.
One night, I was with a friend of mine who had a stalker. She had asked me, a 6'3" amateur cage fighter, to stay with her that night as her roommate was out of town, and she was terrified of this guy who she said had been following her all over the town and trying to get her to go out with him. She had male friends that probably would have been a better match for scaring away a creep than an at first unassuming female like myself, but she didn't feel comfortable asking them to stay at her house while she was alone. I reassured her before she went to sleep that nothing would happen to her and that I'd stay awake in the living room to make sure she was safe. At about 3 a.m, I heard this strange noise outside the house, followed by more noises, and I know in my gut that it's the guy. My mind flashes to other cases of stalking I know of, and I decided right there and then, if he gives me the reason, I'm going to hurt him so bad he'll be crippled for the rest of his life. I know that sounds really cold, but hell, I've been described by several specialists I've been to as having psychopathic tendencies, so I tended to lack empathy and the stigma most people feel about harming another person, even in self-defense. It's what made me a good fighter. In any case, I know that stalkers, as per their psychological profile, don't give up a fixation. So I know if this creep comes in, he's going to get his ass beaten to a pulp. I just sneak quietly over to a corner of the living room in the cover of shadow and keep really silent. I hear the front doorknob jiggle, and I hear the sound of the guy picking the lock. The door opens slowly, and I suddenly feel my heart drop into my stomach as I see that not only does he have a gun, but I know him from my fighting matches. He's a fellow contender, and I've actually faced him before, with a success rate that made me not want to fight him again, let alone with him having a firearm. My friend had been to a couple of my fights at my insistence as a result of me wanting to show off, and that's where he must have seen her first. I stayed as still in my hiding spot as I could and watched him quietly across the room, right towards my friend's door. I'm not used to facing down people armed with more than their bare hands, but I know how to handle the situation, and I felt for actually the first time dread and premature regret over what I was about to do. I forgot to mention that my friend and her roommate had just moved in, so there was only the couch, a TV, and a cabinet in the room, so there wasn't anything I could hit him with. I sneaked up behind him, just as he was about to open the door, and quick as I could I grabbed the gun from him and unloaded the entire magazine into him. My friend screamed her head off, and I took a minute to calm her down before we heard a knock at the door. I grabbed the gun thinking it could be a good bluff against any accomplices this freak had, but my friend assured me from hearing the person's voice that it was her neighbour. We let him in, and a couple of minutes later the cops, whom he had called, showed up. I went down to the station with them to answer their questions and was let off without getting into trouble for what I had done. A couple of weeks later, I found out that I was being charged with murder by the guy's sister, but when he got to court the judge just laughed at her. It was quite a jump for me, to kill someone with a gun instead of beat the crap out of someone with my bare hands, and it made me sick from then on out when I even thought of committing violence in any form. I dropped out of fighting and started rooming with that same friend in order to guard against any more incidents, and to surround myself with gentler people, as unlike me, she was a sweetheart. In the end, I was quite happy to trade my constitution for my friend's life, and it's a hell of a way to grow a conscience. Though it's worth noting that I've noticed the guy's sister a couple of times at the same place as I am. She always keeps a fair distance, so I assume it's coincidental. Hopefully, psycho doesn't run in the family.
Number 13.
Not too long ago, I was hanging out with a friend one Friday night. Typical stuff, pizza, GTA, and just a good time. Around 12, my pal had to leave. Now, he lives right across the street, so he wasn't in any kind of hurry or anything. I was walking out with him through the back door, and I noticed the door to my detached garage was open. I always shut and lock the door, so I noticed this right away. I asked my friend if he had gone in there to get some drinks, and he said he hadn't. I was home alone that night, so my friend was the only other person who could have gone in there. The last time I was in there was probably during the day before my friend came over, and of course I shut and locked it when I exited the garage. After realizing none of us had gone in there, we slowly walked to the door to take a closer look. The lock was busted. Red flag went off, and I told my friend to call the cops, and I ran inside to grab my Colt .357 Python my father handed down to me. I slowly walked into the garage, a gun leading the way. Now this is a 2-leaf garage, so I turned on the light to the lower part and saw nothing. Then I walked upstairs as slowly and as quietly as I could. I turned on the lights and everything looked normal. I was about to call down to my friend telling him everything looked okay, but then I looked in one of the storage cubbies on the side of the room and I saw a man with his back toward me, trying to hide himself in the cubby. I froze. He had a gun in the back of his pants. I was shaking and about to piss myself, but I raised my gun and was about to scream and tell him to get down slowly, but then I heard the sounds of sirens. I walked over to the top of the stairs and put my gun down and got down on my knees. I was still shaking and honestly felt like crying. The cops came up the stairs and one of them helped me back up. I heard one of them yell,
"Sir, get the fuck out of there now."
Then I saw the two cops lead not one, but two men outside. They put them in the back of the squad car, and then they went toward me. One of them asked if I was alright, and then said,
"You were pretty lucky tonight by the looks of it. It looks like they were about to break into your house, and God knows what else."
They took a statement and left. After that, I can't go in the garage alone anymore, especially after dark. I didn't want to tell this story, but then I thought, why not? I feel like some time has passed and I should share it.
Number 12.
It was a Tuesday evening when I got a text from a co-worker asking if I wanted to go on a night run with him. As I have bad knees, I told him that I couldn't run with him, but if he wanted to do a night hike, that would be just fine. He agreed and we arranged to meet at a camping spot in a nearby canyon and follow the road up a couple of miles. At around 11:30, we both arrive at the campsite with flashlights and a water bottle each. As there were no clouds, we decided to walk by moonlight. As we get a good 20 minutes down the road, we start hearing a rustling sound in the bushes next to us. We dismissed it as a skunk or a stray dog. We start joking around that each of us were not scared as the other and continue on our way. A truck passed by with their high beams on, blinding us. My co-worker informs me that he has to answer the call of nature and heads into the next campground to pee. I hear rustling followed by a splash in the stream followed by rustling again. My co-worker comes back running like hell and says, "Dude, we gotta bug out." His face was white as a ghost, which spooked me out because since he is in the army, I figured it had to be serious if he was bugging. We start running back until my knee feels like it's going to collapse. I hear the racking of the slide of a handgun followed by a whisper, "Just in case." He starts half carrying me back the way we came and I pull out my flashlight and shine it towards the bushes and stream. Squatting in the stream was a beast of a man, butt naked, with the whitest grin I have ever seen, and he's growling like a dog. Then he said one word in a low grumble.
"Run."
We dropped our packs and hauled ass as fast as we could to the cars. As soon as I could see the red of my truck, I hit the unlock button on my keys. We hopped in and tore off. I figured the guy was either mentally ill or a junkie of some sort. The second we got cell service, we called the police. They met us at a grocery store parking lot and asked us to lead them to where we saw the man. He was still sitting on top of my co-worker's car waiting for us. He growled at the cops, who tackled him and put him in cuffs. The officer turned the light on in the patrol car, and the man just smiled at us with that same wide grin. As they pulled away, he yelled out of the crack of the open window, "Not fast enough." Neither of us have gone out alone past dark since, and we never heard what happened to this guy.
Number 11.
When I was 12, I was mature for my age, so most of my friends were a couple of years older than I was. So one night, a couple of my friends invited me to a party at a place we called the Train Trestle. Everyone was supposed to meet up around midnight and just hang out and maybe have a drink of a couple of wine coolers or something. So I was like, "Hey, great, sounds awesome, I'll be there." This is on a Friday night, and just to give you some perspective, the Train Trestle was about 3 or 4 miles from my house, and about 2 of those miles was walked through the woods with a train track on one side and woods on the other. There was a small trail, maybe 6 feet wide and about 50 yards down the trail. It takes a turn towards the woods, so there are trees and brush between the trail and the tracks. It was thick enough that you could only catch glimpses of the train tracks. I had been to the train trestle many times, during the day and always with friends, but tonight I'd be going alone. I waited for my parents to go to bed and snuck out my window, headed for the train tracks. It was about a 3/4 moon, so it wasn't terribly dark, and I felt so grown up and free. I get to the trail and start down it. It was a crisp November night, and I enjoy the cold, so I enjoyed my walk. About halfway down the trail, I thought I heard something that sounded like a rock falling from the tracks. I stopped and tried to look on the tracks, but it was fairly obscured by trees and brush, so I carried on. A minute later, I heard what sounded like footsteps in the gravel on the tracks. I stopped again, mildly alarmed. My first thought was that it was a raccoon or maybe a cat walking on the tracks. I took another step and suddenly heard what sounded like a whistle. I turned again, trying to get a look on the tracks. So, of course, this is when the moon goes behind a cloud. And I heard another whistle, followed by what I knew was footsteps on the train tracks. Me, being a dumb 12-year-old and figuring it might be one of my friends also heading to the party, called out, "Hello?" Complete silence. I chalked it up to imagination and continued, although now I was getting the heebies, with a dose of jeebies on the side. I began walking faster. I was now maybe half a mile from the trestle, and suddenly I hear whistling again. I have no idea what the tune was, but it sounded demented. I called out again, "Stacy, is that you?" The whistling stopped, and what I heard next froze my blood. It was low, but audible. It was a deep, gruff laugh. I took off running, and I realized that they were now running too. I could hear rocks and gravel falling from the tracks only a few yards to my right. I was crying now. Then I remembered that very soon would be a small trail that led from the trail I was on, through the trees and brush, up to the tracks. I almost screamed, and as if they knew my thoughts, I heard another laugh, low and deranged. I saw the connecting trail ahead and put my feet into overdrive. Just as I passed the trail, I could hear them leaping down the side of the tracks and feet hitting the trail, running at me. Now I did scream. This person, being, whoever or whatever they were, was now hot on my heels. I even thought I could feel them swiping at my back, trying to grab me. I screamed again, full of complete terror. Then, from in front of me, I heard, "Cat? Is that you, Cat?" "Stacy!" I screamed. Then I realized I could see a bit of the clearing ahead and a small campfire. But best of all, people I knew. I covered the few yards and practically leapt at my friend. She thought I just got spooked from the long dark walk in the woods. When I was able to calm down, I explained to them what happened, hoping maybe one of them was pranking me. And Stacy said that she hadn't seen anyone on the trail but me. Her boyfriend and one of his friends grabbed a flashlight and went out to check it out. Meantime, my friends tried to calm me down. A few minutes later, the guys come back. They were quiet and a bit pale. "Well?" I asked. They looked at each other, and then at us, and my friend's boyfriend said, "We didn't see anyone, but we found this in the center of the trail." From his pocket he pulled out a gardening claw. My mind reeled when I realized that this was what I probably felt was swiping at my back. "And," he continued, "we could have sworn someone was whistling from back in the woods. Sometimes I wonder, what would the outcome have been if I had taken the train tracks instead of the trail?"
Number 10.
Let me start off by saying that this is not my tale. Believe whatever you want, but I know my dad wouldn't make this up. This is a story my dad has told and retold several times throughout the years. It's as creepy now as it was the first time I heard it. so here it goes. It was early 1970s in Des Plaines, Illinois. Back then it was not uncommon to hitchhike. My dad and my uncle, his younger brother, enjoyed doing this as they were quite the adventurers. They were both pretty young, in their early teens. They had just gone fishing when they had made their way to a nearby coffee shop parking lot in search of a ride to get close to home. A middle-aged man stopped to pick them up. There was nothing really striking about this guy, he just looked like a typical guy. So they got in the car with him. My dad sat in the passenger seat while my uncle sat in the middle back seat. Everything was fine until the driver reached his arm towards the back of the car and put his hand on my uncle's knee. My dad's creepometer sounded right away, and as soon as they came to a stoplight, my dad got out of the car, took his brother by the arm and got the hell out of there. Fast forward a few years later. It's 1978, and my dad catches a glimpse of a familiar face in the Chicago newspaper. It's the man who had picked them up a few years back. The article states that this man was arrested after police found 33 teenage males buried in various parts of his home, including the crawl space. This sick man would find teenage boys wherever he could to rape, torture, and kill. His name was John Wayne Gacy. Needless to say, I am happy my dad reacted as quickly as he did. My dad and uncle were the right age to be one of his victims. It's scary to think what could have happened and how I wouldn't be here today. So, Gacy, even though you're dead right now, I am so thankful you and my dad never got to really meet.
Number 9.
I used to work as a substitute custodian for a school district, which essentially amounted to me filling in for full-time custodians that called out for work for various reasons in different schools. I basically was responsible for cleaning a part of the school in question and locking the place down for the night when we were done. My story took place on one of my last months working there when I was called in to fill in for a middle school custodian that had gotten sick. Now, the middle of the school had a reputation for being haunted as it was close to being 100 years old, and at one point served as the sole building for every grade till 12th. The third floor in particular was known for noises, footsteps, and other happenings. To my dismay, I was assigned the third floor to clean up that night as a part of my routine. When I eventually did start working up there, all was well for the first hour or so. I was still a little unnerved, but worked quickly to get the hell out. Since it was around 8 at night, the building was closed to visitors, and it was only me and one other guy inside. As I rounded the corner to one of the last classrooms, I heard what sounded like a little girl laughing. I was freaked out, but nevertheless had to make sure no one was inside. "Is anyone there?" I called out. "The building's closed." No answer. I searched every classroom, checked every window to see if they were open, and then started looking in the restrooms. As I got there, I heard a set of footsteps running my way from behind. I turned, only to see no one there. Needless to say, I packed the cleaning materials away in record time and booked it. My co-worker unsurprisingly said he had nothing to do with the noises, but people have complained about it before. I had to clean that floor again a couple of times after that, but never had such an experience like that again.
Number 8.
It was March 2009. The events that had occurred that night happened roughly between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. I was 16 years old at the time, and my grandmother was in the hospital. Things weren't looking good for her, so my family from Australia had travelled over to stay with us in case she didn't get better. My house is fairly big, but with my family and my family in Australia, which consisted of my aunt, uncle and 2 cousins, it was feeling pretty cramped. It was annoying having a little space to myself, but after this event, I am thankful they were there. One night, the lights were all turned out and everyone had gone to bed. Now, my house has 3 levels to it. My room is on the middle level and I usually spend a large amount of time staying up late on my laptop on YouTube or something. It was about 3 AM when suddenly there was a large bang at the front door. I had earphones in and I could hear this clear as day. It was so loud. The banging continued. Now this wasn't just a knock, this was a full force banging, as if the person wanted to knock the door down or break it. I leapt out of bed into the hall. My dad and my uncle met me in the hall, both completely baffled by what was going on. Now, I was 16, but I'm a big guy and I knew I could take care of myself, as did they, so we ventured down the stairs. Our alarm is in motion detected, and once we reached halfway down the stairs, the alarm began to go off. Now, the box to deactivate the alarm is close to the front door, where this loud banging was coming from. My dad went over to the alarm and deactivated it, and shouted through the front door to the intruder,
Who is it?
My dad yelled with an angry tone in his voice. With that, a car pulled into the drive and shone its lights straight at the door, full blast. Our door has small panels of glass, but you can't see clearly out of them, due to the design and a peephole. The light from the car made it impossible to try to see anything out of the front door. We heard two men yelling something inaudible to one another. With that, I ran into the kitchen to grab a knife. My dad and my uncle stayed in the downstairs hall near the door in case someone tried to come in. As I grabbed a knife, I decided I should just double check the back garden to make sure no one was there. Now, I was actually expecting to see someone, so I had to brace myself. But when I pulled the blind back and saw two men running from the left to the right of my garden behind our conservatory and out of sight, I felt my heart drop. I took the knife and ran out telling my dad what happened. That's when we noticed the car lights were flashing on and off, and the shadowy outline of a tall man could be seen out the door, standing directly against the glass. He began kicking and banging the door down again. I honestly thought the frame of the door was going to cave in, it was so loud. My dad shouted that the police were on their way, and that they should leave now before they get caught. My uncle had then moved from the hall to the dining room, to which you get a better view of the side of the conservatory. Thankfully, he got there just in time to see the foot of one of the men just disappear onto the roof. With that, he sprinted upstairs. My room was the room just above the conservatory, but there was no way to scale the side of the house after that, so my uncle thought they had to just jump back down. My two cousins were sleeping on the third level, and somehow one of the men got all the way up, and began attempting to smash the glass on the big windows we had facing the sky. He was literally directly above them. They ran out of the door and my uncle ran up. Thankfully, the windows opened outwards, so with a huge push, my uncle sent the window flying open, knocking the man to one side on the roof. He scuttled to the edge of the roof and slipped slightly due to the heavy rain that was falling. He jumped into a tree we have at the side of the house in the garden, which is probably the only way he got to the roof. Back downstairs, about 4 men in total started shouting someone's name, asking for someone. I can't remember what the name was. My dad said that they have the wrong house, but they didn't leave him, and suddenly the car began beeping its horn and the men disappeared as quickly as they came. Everyone was on edge, but there was nothing more we could do in the dead of night in the rain. So everyone went upstairs. The following morning, after the police had come, we inspected the outside of the house. At first it seemed like it was only a few marks here and there from the damage done banging and kicking the doors and glass. But then we found smashed bottles with jagged edges carefully stashed in the bushes in the back garden. There was also a picture of the floor plans to my house that was slightly out of date, as it didn't have the conservatory added. But most strange was a picture of a family with a circle going across the face of a man who looked to be in his late 20s. At first I thought it was the previous owners, but then I remembered that our house has history in general, and these were definitely not the owners. Either way, they had the wrong house and the wrong family. But I hope the family in that photo are safe.
Number 7.
So, just to set the scene, I'm in a new country, Cyprus. To be more exact, the Turkish side. I'm staying in an apartment section in the middle of nowhere. The fact that they speak Turkish does not really fit in until later. It's a 10-minute walk to the nearest shop, and there's a lot of tall grass and fields. As well as this, There are a few stray dogs and cats I can see. A small figure stealthily moving on all fours. I run over to investigate like the adventurer I thought I was, and I put my hand out and meow lightly and put my hand out to a stray cat with straggly fur and unclipped paws. She licks it and rolls over for me to stroke her belly. I follow her into an abandoned looking building that still has doors. The frames and windows were missing and needed to be installed. The left window had some glass though, and it was left apart from that empty window frame. I go into this house as it was, being a naive 14-year-old. As I move in, I didn't think much of a clunking noise I could hear around the house. I dismissed it as a beetle hitting the steel bars inside or something like that. But then I hear a word in Greek that I later translated as hello. Mahaba? I said shakily, as I don't know any Greek whatsoever, and that's the Turkish word for hello. All of a sudden, a frail-looking man between his 40s and 50s poked his head out from the corner, wiped his nose with his hand, and I presumed he had a cold until I saw white powder in his greasy caveman-like beard. It was safe to say I was shitting it. I backed away slowly and noticed something that haunts me still. There was a cat, dead on the floor, almost skinned with a large piece of glass poking out of its stomach. I couldn't bring myself to run, and I just asked in the calmest way I could, "Ananasisim? Are you okay?" in Turkish. He mumbled something that wasn't audible nor understandable, and as I turned to walk out, I stumbled over a plank of wood, and my phone flew out of my top pocket. Thinking nothing of the man while still being slightly cautious, I bent down to reach my phone. As I did that, the man swiftly pushed my arm to the floor, and as he reached for the glass shank, I kicked him in the jaw. I didn't plan this at all, it was just a reaction. I ran away shouting bloody murder, and I guess all the commotion attracted a person, who I guess called the police, because after 5 minutes of running away, I turned around and a van pulled up, and an armed officer aimed at the man and said in Turkish, and then Greek, and finally English, "Get on the fucking floor." He obliged and was taken away. It turned out he somehow passed through the south to the North Cypriot border as he was speaking Greek. This creepy, greasy border-crossing cat-killing druggie. Let's never meet again.
Number 6.
My cousin would come over to my house every weekend for about 3 or 4 months straight. Me and him didn't see each other for about 3 years prior to this, and we've always been like brothers all our lives, so I love the fact that I got to see him so often. This happened about 4 months ago, and every time he came over I would always suggest going for a walk whenever we got bored. I live in a relatively peaceful suburb of Victoria, and I had never heard or seen anything strange in at least 5 years, so I didn't think twice about going for a walk late at night. It was about 11 o'clock at night or so, and my parents had some people over, having a few drinks and being loud, laughing and just having a good time. The typical stuff adults do when they have a get-together. My cousin and I were in my room playing video games when I suggested to him we go for a walk. He was used to me asking every time he came over, so he agreed, and we headed off on what we thought would be a typical walk around the neighbourhood. At the end of the street you can go either left or right. We went right, and when we came to the roundabout there were 4 different ways we could go. I decided to go left towards a park that was down the end of the road. I should note that the park also has a basketball court next to it. But anyway, my cousin didn't live in the area, so he always let me lead the way. My cousin and I are quite loud when we get together, and we always yell and make jokes and are a bit obnoxious, typical teenagers. As we were talking up the street toward the park, I noticed someone on the basketball court. I told my cousin to be quiet because I thought it was polite to not act like a couple of idiots. I thought it was just someone playing basketball since there are houses on the left side of the park and across the road. But there was no sounds of anyone playing. As we got closer, we saw that it was a man in a white hoodie. He had his hood up and was looking at the ground, standing directly in the middle of the court, not moving. I whispered to my cousin, "What the fuck?" I then whispered to him to go this way, nodding my head to the left back towards the street I lived on. We never took our eyes off the guy though, and we were sure to be as quiet as possible. I'm sure he had heard us, however. Even when we were being quiet, we were still quite loud. The guy never turned around to look at us though, and he never moved a muscle. We weren't paying attention to where we were walking and kicked some wood that was laying on the footpath. If talking wasn't enough to get his attention, that definitely would have been. The street filled with the sound of crashing wood. "Fuck," I whispered. I turned back to look at the guy, and he still hadn't moved or turned to look at us, and he was still in the middle of the basketball court. At this point, my cousin and I were creeped the fuck out. I said to my cousin, "Fuck this, let's go home." He agreed, and we got to the end of the street around the bend, and we were about to walk down my street. My cousin said to me, "Hey, let's go back and see if he's still there." Me being me, I said to him, "Alright, let's go." And instead of going the way we just came, we went to the same way we originally went, essentially doing a big loop. And this is where it got really creepy. It would have been only a minute before we got back to the basketball court, and I looked at my cousin with a what the fuck look, and he gave me the same one. The basketball court was empty. This isn't too strange because he could have simply lived in one of the houses near there and went back inside after we walked past. I asked my cousin what he wanted to do, and he said to keep walking. I said okay, and we started walking past the park. It's a fairly big park and it has no lights whatsoever in it, so it's pitch black. My cousin jokingly says, "Hey, let's go through the park." I'm not afraid of the dark, so I said, "Alright then." He gave me a strange look and we were about to walk through. I looked and saw a dark figure though. Now, there are a few trees in the park, so I assumed it was one of them, but I noticed that this figure was actually standing behind a tree, and it moved very slightly further behind it. I was seriously creeped out, but I didn't want to say anything now, so I laughed and said to my cousin, "Nah, I'm joking man, fuck that, let's go this way," and started walking the way we were going to go in the first place. We walked up the street. It was one straight run for about 15 minutes before we got to the main road. My cousin and I were constantly joking about the guy, saying he could be in one of the houses we were walking past, or in one of the many houses that were being built at the time. We even went as far as saying he lived in one of the dumpsters that was in the street. We laughed and tried to diffuse how creeped out we were. By this time we were about 300 meters up the road when I turned around, just to see if the guy was following us. He wasn't, but what I saw still sent shivers down my spine. At the very end of the street, just on the edge of the park, I saw him, the guy in the white hoodie, still up, looking down the street at us. I turned back around and continued talking to my cousin. I'm sure he was the one behind the tree. I didn't tell my cousin I saw someone behind the tree though. I didn't want to freak him out, and I didn't tell him I saw the guy staring at us now. My cousin told me he didn't want to walk much further and asked to turn around and go home. There was no way in hell I was going back that way though, so I made up some bullshit that I wanted to go to the shop that was just down the road. He wasn't happy, but he said alright. The shops are closed at this point, which I knew, but I acted disappointed anyway. So we went along the way home, which took us about 45 minutes or so. When we got back, my parents and their friends were still up talking and stuff, and they hadn't realised we left and didn't realise we came in. My cousin and I went into my room and continued playing video games. We went to sleep about an hour later, and the next day his dad picked him up at about 10 in the morning. But the story doesn't end here. The next weekend my cousin, like usual, was over at my house. We were talking about what happened the previous weekend when we suggested we go for a walk again. I didn't really want to after what happened, but I reluctantly agreed, and he said he wanted to go past the basketball court again. I said okay, and we were walking towards it when we saw it was very faintly lit up by flickering orange light. We got closer and I told him I wasn't feeling well, so once again we turned and left and started heading towards my street. We looked in the court and in the middle was a small fire. What we saw next still makes us uncomfortable. Sitting around the fire were 5 people, all with hoodies on, not moving, not talking, just looking directly at the fire. My cousin and I looked at each other and quietly but quickly got the hell out of there. I don't know what they were doing, and I don't know if it had something to do with the guy we saw the previous week, but I know my cousin and I never went for walks late at night again. I never told anyone about what happened, and as far as I know, he never did either. What still creeps me out is that this only happened 5 minutes from my house, in a seemingly quiet place. We moved since this happened, but our new house is only up the road from the old one, and that guy and those fire weirdos live in the same area I do. So to the men in the white hoodie and the creepy fire weirdos, let's never, ever fucking meet.
Number 5.
Well, I'll begin when I was 15 years old. I had been having issues within my home with my father. Me being the only girl living with a younger brother, I look back and see that my dad was just doing the best he could as a single parent. Anyways, I had decided to run away. It was around 11 PM, and I had snuck out through the back of my second floor house. Now, the area I live is very small. The only thing dividing my little city is a bridge from north to south. As I was walking towards the north side, since I was living in the south, I had to cross the bridge. I decided to take the underpass underneath the bridge though. Along the underpass is a park and a daycare centre with a playground. There are lots of trees towering over the walkway through the underpath, and on that particular day it had snowed, so the park was blanketed with white. You can imagine I was cold and had realised how stupid I was for walking on this creepy trail so late at night. I figured I was already halfway through the underpass and started walking faster. The park was so quiet, you could hear the faintest sound. Almost reaching the playground of the childcare centre, I heard footsteps in the snow. It had been so sudden but impossible to ignore. I turned around and saw a shadow behind a huge tree, illuminating from the light post beside the walkway of the park. I had known then that that was a shadow of a man hiding behind the tree. I didn't even think twice. I ran so fast, jumped the fence to the centre's playground, and looked in front of me towards the park I had just come from. Nobody there. I heard nobody following me, and I had to go pee so badly. I admit, I took a piss in the playground of the child centre, the whole time looking out towards the park, making sure nobody snuck up on me. After I was done, I took one last check of my surroundings and jumped the fence and ran like hell towards the end over the pass. I thank God I have good ears and heard whoever it was trying to sneak up on me. I have a huge feeling that my father would have been left daughterless. You see, there is a waterfall along the underpass. I call that area the park by the water. But every so many years, women and men have gone missing, even jumped off the bridge. I could have been left there and nobody would have even known, as that river leads into the ocean.
Number 4.
Years ago, when I was a child, I was selling Girl Scout cookies around my neighbourhood. Back then, parents were more relaxed and didn't mind a child going door to door on their own as much as they do today. I lived in a safe neighbourhood where nothing really happened too. I was going house to house, but I wasn't having much luck. I saw this red car pull up in the driveway, so I ran to catch them as they exited the car. I was desperate to make some sales. I saw there were 3 of them as they got out. 2 elderly people, 1 male, 1 female, and the third person was a young woman in her 30s. The elderly people saw me and got really excited. From far away I thought their eyes looked black, but I assumed it was just because of the distance between us. I didn't make anything of it, but I thought something was off about them when they started excitedly running towards me. I put a smile on my face and said hello as they were running up. But my smile turned into an expression of horror when they came right by me, and I saw that their eyes truly were pitch black. They had no whites in their eyes. They looked down at me with huge smiles on their faces. I just froze in place with fear. They looked at each other for a second and the woman said something to the man. I was so afraid that I didn't understand what she said. They looked right back at me, that were slightly bent down and just right in my face. The woman who was with them ran up, took their arms to pull them away, and sincerely apologized. She said, "I'm so sorry," and hurried them inside. As soon as she took them and went towards the house, I became unfrozen and ran almost all the way back home. When I slowed down, I started to feel bad. I rationalized to myself that maybe they had some kind of disorder that made them that way. I mean, they did behave like 2-year-olds. I looked it up years later to find a disorder that matched what I had seen, but I couldn't find anything. Still, I thought maybe it was just a rare disorder, and that was why I couldn't find anything. It wasn't until a few years ago when I found out about the black-eyed children from a friend. This raises so many questions. Who were those people? Why did they have black eyes? Why was that woman caring for them like they couldn't care for themselves? If the theory is that these black-eyed people are really alien human children, then what are they doing living in a human neighborhood? Maybe the combination messed up their genes and made these two mentally ill. I'll never really know what the hell they were, and why a normal lady cared for them. Makes you wonder what people know that we don't.
Number 3.
I lived in a peaceful society. There wasn't any violence or any worries really. Being from Canada, you normally wouldn't expect any sort of crimes. This incident occurred almost 3 years ago now. I used to live in Mississauga. Where I lived, there were many forests and parks. I had lived in this city for 5 years, and I felt very confident at the time, and quite frankly, my parents were the chill type. It was the winter, and it felt depressing staying at home, and I'm not gonna lie, I didn't have a lot of friends, and the friends I did have were all moody assholes. There wasn't a lot of things to do in my area, to be honest. It was always boring, but we had a lot of parks around our apartment. So my friend and I would go outside and play in the snow, just to make it a bit more fun. Brandon didn't live that far from me, and he was better than my other moody friends. Brandon and I would go around doing anything, parkour, snow fight, and explore around the city. It was late, and Brandon and I were at a park opposite from my building. About 10 minutes walk, we also had a park right next to my building, but it didn't have a lot of variety. Now, if you live in Canada, you would know how cold it is here. And if you don't have gloves or the proper clothing, then you're not going to have a good time. We were at the park and playing and doing all types of stupid shit you can imagine 13-year-olds doing. It was around 8. My friend Brandon had strict parents, and they demanded that he would come back max 8 o'clock. I didn't want to stay there by myself, so I went along with Brandon. We were talking about our crushes while we neared the apartment. Brandon went his way and I went to my apartment, and as I got home after 10 minutes, I realized I didn't bring my gloves. I messaged Brandon on Facebook asking if he had them, but he said he didn't. I realized I left them at the park. I accepted the loss and carried on. The next day it was at least -15, and I awoke to my mum yelling at me about my gloves. It wasn't about the price, it was that my mum thought I wasn't responsible. I told her I gave it to Brandon. It was Saturday, and it was an off day. It was 5 PM now, and I was really bored, sadly. All my friends were busy, and I didn't want to stay at home. I hurried out and geared up for the cold. I told my mum I was going to get my gloves from Brandon, and as I went outside, clueless what to do, I went to the park. I just went to the swings, rocking back and forth. Time had passed, and it was around 8:30, and I decided it was time to go. As I was about to go, I saw what seemed to be 2 people walk down the park. There was only one footpath leading to the park, and there was also one exit. I didn't really think anything of it, just some people walking through the park that was huge, and this was before my eyes were all stuffed up. As I got closer to these people, they started staring at me. I didn't really have an option at this point, so I just decided to walk away from the footpath. As I got closer to them, I saw them go deeper into the bushes. I thought it was weird, but they were probably a couple doing their business or something. As I walked further, I had to go on the footpath as there was nowhere else to go. At this time, I couldn't spot the people. At the time, I didn't know what to think, but it was my alarm to get out of there. As I was going out, in the back near the bushes, I could hear some mumbling noises and the noises of footsteps in there. I didn't look back, I just got out. As I got out of the park, I felt relieved, and I felt a little stupid for causing so much drama. I decided to go nearby my convenience store, which was only 5 minutes away, and as I was walking to the store, I could hear sirens in the background. I got in the store and I bought a Red Bull. I waited for my turn, I paid the amount and headed out to look around at the time. It was around 9 PM now. I ran down the road quickly. After what felt like minutes, I got near my apartment. As I got there, I saw 3 police cars and 1 canine dog car. I went over and asked him what happened. He told me it was nothing, and he asked me to leave as they were blocking the exits. I told him I was just at the park. He laughed for a second and asked me again, but this time he looked a bit confused. He took my summary and I told him clearly what happened. He took my address and I asked him what happened. He explained to me that they were looking for 2 suspected people for child abduction. At that point, my heart sank. I could feel my hair on my body spike up. It all made sense that they were hiding for me, waiting for me to pass by. Till this day, I still get chills thinking about it.
Number 2.
I am an extremely skeptical person, as I'm sure a lot of you are too. This experience occurred about 3 years ago. I was staying up with my uncle in Washington State, and we were going to camp up in the middle of nowhere of the national park in Yakima country. It was my uncle, cousin, their family dog, and my uncle's buddy set up to go on this expedition. Before we left, my uncle told me that this particular spot we were headed to has been a fairly often region for supposed Bigfoot activity. Yeah, right, I thought to myself. He showed me some YouTube video of a Bigfoot scream captured around the same area we were headed. He told me that the creatures were said to knock sticks on branches and vocalize in order to communicate with one another. I laughed it off as just another bullshit claim, yet his chilling seriousness about the subject sent a slight wave of uneasiness through my body. We departed the next day. Before I get to the real experience, let me tell you a little bit about the area. If you've ever been in Washington State woods in the mountains, you would know that it is extremely immense as well as dense. The particular campsite we were trying to stay at was around 45 minutes away from any even normal mountain road, and we rode a boat across the lake to further isolate ourselves. It is around a lake and is surrounded by huge uninhabited mountain slopes all around. The second night we were there, we decided to all go on a late night hike up the mountain. There were no paths, so we followed what looked to be some sort of deer or other animal trail. As we went, things got a little strange. Off in the dark distance, we could hear loud knocking on trees. It wasn't random, it was almost as if it was in a set pattern. We stopped and listened for a bit, but dismissed it as nothing. As we continued our ascent, something stopped us in our tracks. Off in the distance, we heard a blood-curdling, bone-chilling howl. It sounded like a woman's scream, only deeper and more guttural than high-pitched. It was obviously loud, but was a ways down the mountain and off in a skewed direction. I have been exposed to many wild animals, and I have heard mountain lions, wolves, even moose making odd noises, but this was different. This was almost human, but with a beastly tone. My mind instantly connected it with the video my uncle showed me. It sounded very similar. Everyone was shocked, confused, and a little bit scared. Before we could mutter a word, another scream-like howl shattered the silence following the previous one. This time, it was right to our left, maybe 100 feet away. We all shot our lights over, exclaiming profanities and almost shitting our pants, but the forest was so dense that we couldn't see a thing. Our dog booked it down the mountain, towards the direction of our campsite. We were worried about her, but we had almost made it to the top, so we proceeded, confident that her hound senses would surely lead her back to our site. We made it up, and on our way down, my uncle and I were a little ahead of my cousin and his friend. All of a sudden, a stinking smell made me almost gag. It smelled like a musty old blanket that had been covered in the piss of every animal you can imagine. It reeked, almost like the strong musk smell of a primate at the zoo. My uncle and I stopped and whispered to each other as to what it could be. As we paused, a huge branch snapped, as if it had been run over by a truck. This was not just any little twig snap like we had been hearing through our expedition. This was a deep, thick crack of something large. I shot my flashlight over to the source, and that's when I saw it. A huge looming creature walking on two legs and swinging its arms slowly as it walked. It was moving up the hill in an area amidst the huge pine trees. In the pitch blackness of the forest, my flashlight lit this figure up. It was huge, 7-8 feet tall at least, and extremely bulky and powerful looking. Its head almost brushed the start of the branches of the immense pine tree surrounding it. I gasped. I couldn't move, not a muscle. I just stared in shock as it turned and looked at the light. Its two huge circular eyes, illuminated by the light, shined at us and blinked. It turned and continued to lumber up into the thicker bush, and then out of sight. My uncle and I couldn't say a word. We didn't even speak until we got back to our site, where luckily we were greeted by his dog. As we sat by the fire, it was around 3:30 at that time, and the same howling noise happened another few times off in the distance. I can say with certainty that it was not human. This place was completely isolated. It was off a beaten track, and that sound chills me to the bone every time I think about it. I'm a huge skeptic. I never thought I could ever believe in any stupid myth like the Sasquatch. But believe me when I tell you, this is no joke. This is a true experience, and one that I will never, ever forget. There are hundreds of thousands of miles of unexplored and completely uninhabited areas of the world. The chance that a creature like that could be living under our very noses is not really out of question. So instead of dismissing any Bigfoot claims or stories as an idiotic cry for attention or trolling, I now think back to my experience, and I have to believe there is something out there, and maybe you too will experience it one day.
Number 1.
So, I don't really know where to begin. First off, I guess, I always watched ghost hunters and laughed at how fake it all was. Then I moved to college. I suppose I'll start with moving to college. I started college in 2012 at a small southern college in Milledgeville, Georgia. It was just like you would expect. Cool people, fun times, and just an amazing experience. One night, while out playing Pong at 4 or 5 in the morning, I overheard a few of my friends talking about a place a few blocks away that was supposedly haunted beyond belief. It was a place called Central State Hospital. A little history on the place. Central State was a lunatic asylum that was started in the 1800s. From lobotomies to everything you could imagine, it took place there. In fact, across the nearly 2,000-acre land the hospital resided on, there are over 20,000 bodies buried that are completely unidentified. People who were mentally unstable or insane from across the country came here, and died here. Well, a trip was planned, and a few nights later we made our way to Central State. My roommate and I, we'll call him Andre, we rode around and dicked around like the typical 18-year-old college freshman would do. We drove around the land and looked at all the creepy buildings that seemed to be lost in time. We drove around for a good few hours in the night, till about 2 a.m, at which time we figured we'd seen enough and headed back. A few nights later, another 2 friends of mine, we'll call them Alan and Eric, asked me about the trip and asked if we could go check it out. Feeling like I knew the place well and didn't see anything at the first time, I felt like a hard ass and saying, "Yeah, I'll give you the grand tour." So Eric and Alan were roommates on my freshman year. Eric ended up having to work the night we were going, so Alan and I headed to the grounds. Upon getting there, we both drove around and had the oohs and ahs as a typical person would. While heading on our way, out on a late night, probably 3 a.m. or so, we passed a cul-de-sac filled of old abandoned and falling apart houses. Alan was in the passenger seat of my car and I was in the driver's seat. Looking out each of our windows, the cul-de-sac was on my side. I looked down there and there was a street light at the very far end of it. In between the road and the cul-de-sac was not much light, so it was very hard to see. I drove slowly and noticed a black outline of something in the middle of the road, stopping the light from the cul-de-sac behind it. I drove past and didn't think much of it, thinking it could be a bush or something. I mentioned it to Alan and he said he didn't see anything, but to do a loop around so he could look. I took a loop around to the cul-de-sac and we both looked with glaring eyes to the black outline I saw before. I glanced to where I saw it at first, but saw nothing. Thinking it was just my tired mind playing with me, I looked back at the road ahead of me and slowly kept going. Alan is not the type to yell. He's probably one of the most calm people I've ever met. I slowly started to keep going, and as soon as I did, I heard the most terrifying yell come from Alan. I gunned the throttle of my car down the road. I just yelled back, "What was it?" Alan responded, "I don't know. I finally saw the black outline you mentioned, and as soon as I fixed my eyes on it, it made a mad dash towards the car." Needless to say, we were both terrified at this point. We didn't want to get out of the car. I mean, this was 3 in the morning. Most people were asleep and it was a good half-mile walk from where we park our cars to our apartment. So we decided to do what any like-minded person would do. We drove around until 4 in the morning, trying to calm our nerves. We were slowly coming back to a normal heart rate when we saw a homeless-looking person under a streetlight in the road ahead of us. We slowed down. Homelessness is a normal thing around this town, but as we passed, something was wrong. The homeless man's eyes were blue. This man was a black African American. When I say blue, I don't mean the pretty boy model blue, but the blue like he was blind. The blue icy eyes that come from some kind of horror movie. As we slowly drove past him, he lifted his hand and pointed straight at us, while mumbling some kind of chant. Needless to say, we were ready to shit ourselves. I'd like to say that that's where the story ended, but that was just the beginning. We ended up finally getting back into the dorms around 4:30 a.m. and we were both very tired and freaked out, so we just decided to try and call it a night. A few weeks went on and nothing weird happened. It was just like how the semester started. Cool people, hanging out all the time and having a lot of fun. Then things started happening, in Eric and Alan's room mainly. They were 1 floor above and a few rooms over from Andre and I. We constantly hung out in Alan and Eric's room though, so we noticed things in different positions, small things at first, like pieces of paper and things in the bathroom. We thought it was just people or the air conditioning moving it, but we finally got tired of all the confusion and we did what we thought would be the best possible thing. We rented out a little shitty video camera from the school library and set it up in Alan and Eric's bathroom one night when we left for dinner one night. On a side note, we also put some ping pong balls, the only thing we could find at the time, in front of the camera and closed and locked all the doors and turned off the air conditioning so there was no airflow. So we left not thinking much of it. We went and ate dinner, and Eric had to come back early and then head to the library to go study for tests. Alan and I found our way back to his dorm room and picked up the camera and noticed all the ping pong balls were in Eric's room by his bed. We assumed he got there early and moved them before we left. We finally got around to checking the video a few days later and was startled by what was on it. The entire video was full of voices and footsteps stomping around the camera. Then the craziest thing happened. Halfway through the video, the balls rolled from the bathroom into Eric's room without anything touching them. Right when we reached this point in the video, Alan and I could hear Eric's dresser doors loudly opening and closing. Not realizing he was back already, I ran into his room about to tell him he needed to come and see this. I walked in his room, opened his door, and was welcomed by darkness. Nobody was in his room, and nobody had been in this room for hours. I walk back to Alan's room and tell him, and we both just decide to drop this. We were going to stop thinking about and giving any attention to whatever the fuck was bothering us. So, a few weeks went on and nothing really happened. We went home for the Christmas break, thinking everything had cleared, and we came back to a new semester without the pest that had been with us. We came back and everything was great for a while, just normal school again. One night, Alan, Eric, Andre and I were watching scary movies on Netflix, bored out of our minds, and we started talking about that crazy shit that happened the semester before. We shouldn't have done that. The next day, Alan and I walked into his room and just feel something very wrong. You ever get that feeling somebody is right behind you, just staring at you? Yeah, it felt like that. Things started happening again. One night, near the end of the second semester, Alan and I had went and picked up some dinner and were walking back into his room. We could hear the radio absolutely blaring in Eric's room. I said, well, I guess Eric is having a party tonight or something along those lines. We opened Alan's door and noticed something really, really weird about the radio in Eric's room. It wasn't playing music, it was playing a baseball game broadcast. And not just any broadcast. It sounded like something from the early 1900s, blaring through the entire dorm. I go to walk into Eric's room asking him what the hell he's doing, and right as I turn to go in, the radio stops. It doesn't turn down, it just flat stops. I looked around and nobody was in the room, of course. Alan and I both said, "What the fuck?" and walked out. I refused to really go back into their rooms anymore after that, and again, I would love to say that that's where it all ended, but it's not. The next year, Andre and I lived together again, and we were assigned rooms. On move-in day, we find each other and greet each other in the typical ways. Then we head to find our rooms, and we find them. We are in the rooms located directly under Eric and Alan's room from the year before. Fuck. We expect the worst, but try and keep our mind off the thing, whatever it was. We go on an entire semester and nothing happened. It was sophomore year of college. For us it was filled of Netflix, Xbox, working on our cars, and class. Nothing crazy. The spring semester starts, and early into the semester we have a massive snowstorm come through. Eric ends up losing power at his place, and him and his girlfriend come by to stay the night. So we play Netflix for a while until the lights start blinking, and it happens. We lose power. Luckily, we had a few candles and lit them throughout the room and the bathroom and decided to play some card games. We probably played for a good 2 hours or so. Yes, we were pretty competitive. We play and play, and eventually we get tired of it and just sit and talk. Eventually, the subject of last year comes up. Eric asks if we have had anything like that happen to us this year. In that moment, that very moment of him asking, after nothing happening for an entire semester, it came back. In the middle of him asking about it, we heard a loud cling from the bathroom. It sounded like glass hitting something. Everyone was in the same room, so there was no way it was one of us. It came from the bathroom. Andre gets up and walks into the bathroom, very slowly, just to look around. He looks on the bathroom counter, and next to the one candle we had lit, laid a spoon. Andre picks up the spoon and has to hit the glass candle hard for the exact same ring to come back. We all sit in disbelief. We kept all our silverware in the drawer under the counter. Whatever was with us had to get a spoon out of the drawer, pick it up, and smack the spoon halfway up the candle, and lay the spoon down on the counter without us hearing it hit the counter again. What the fuck? Whatever was gone had now returned. We all go back to the bathroom to look around in disbelief. We look for an explanation for a good 20 minutes. There was not one. We decide, screw it, just a coincidence, and start heading back to Andre's room where we were before. We all walk back into the room, following each other, and Eric is the last in the line. We're almost back in the room and we hear something fall and Eric say, "Ow! What the fuck was that?" Something just hit me in the back of the head. We look around and by the candlelight see a Tupperware container laying on the ground that was simply not where it was before. We officially freak out and leave and go play in the snow for a few hours. We were gone for a while, and when we returned, we were all exhausted and ready to go to sleep. Things started happening in Andre's and I's room after that. Doors would close in front of us, sometimes locking themselves as well. This happened for a while. One time, Andre and I had just finished up an MLB game on his Xbox, and I was heading towards my room for bed. I walk through our bathroom and notice our toilet room door open and the light on. I notice that Andre is behind me by a few feet and leave it there so he can use it. I walk a few more feet and jokingly hear, "Way to go, fucktard, you locked the bathroom door up." I turned around and asked, "What are you talking about? It's wide open." I turn the corner. It is closed, and it is locked. The 5 seconds it took from me leaving the bathroom to him walking in, the door closed itself and locked itself. This started happening all the time. Almost every day my closet door would close and lock itself. There was no way to fix it, and this went on for months, with this thing just messing with us. It was now May. We had a few days left of sophomore year, and we were ready to get out of this haunted-ass dorm room. We signed a lease with an apartment, so we knew we could get away from whatever it was. One of the last nights we lived in that room, I was sick. I had the flu or something near that, and had been lying in bed for an hour or so and was just trying to get some rest. I hear Andre turn on the shower in the shower room, and we usually left the door open a good bit to keep the air from getting all mouldy. We also probably had the cheapest shower curtain known to man. It was like $3 at a Dollar General. Completely clear. Anyway, I laid in the bed, about to fall asleep, and a few minutes later I see Andre walk into my room with a towel around him, and he says, "Did you need something from my room?" I looked at him confused and said, "No." I don't know what he's talking about. He looks at me and says, "Oh, okay, I was just wondering what you were doing in my room." I look at him and explain that I'd been laying in bed for over an hour now. He turns white as snow. I could tell he was scared. Meanwhile, I was still confused at this point. He looks at me and says, "No, I just saw somebody walk from my bedroom into your room, plain as day. I saw it walk through." I look at him in disbelief and think, holy shit. Whatever the hell has been following us has finally shown itself. Those last remaining days dragged by. Both of us were scared to death. Luckily, nothing happened to us after that. I couldn't move out fast enough. We haven't had anything like this happen since. We still go to the grounds of Central State and have actually found a woodland area with thousands of unmarked graves of dead insane people. It's scary, that's for sure. We've ghost hunted there a few times when we can actually make ourselves stay. We actually have a few clips of voices talking. One of the main ones being when I asked for someone to speak, and clear as day on my recording you hear, "I'm talking." Well, that's my story. I'm sure there are skeptics out there that believe I'm full of it, but this was all true. I've been through so much of that kind of stuff my first 2 years of college, that now if anything happens, I'm just like, well, that's just great, in a sarcastic way. So if you're ever in the middle of Georgia, be sure to stop by Milledgeville if you're into paranormal things. You really won't regret it. Probably. G'day mates. Wow, what a marathon, hey? I'd be interested to know actually who watched the entire video, so let me know in the comments below guys if you watched the whole thing. So guys, we are now 70,000 strong in the hive. The channel is just going ballistic. I can't believe how fast it's growing. Once again guys, thank you all so much for sharing the video with your friends. So many people are doing this, and it's just so amazing to see our channel grow so quickly with all of you guys supporting it. Also, so many people are liking the videos, commenting, and I just feel so thankful to all of you mates. Thank you so much. Also, thank you to Erin Frost for her amazing thumbnail art once again. Don't forget to go and support her guys and check out her stuff. Also, please remember to send me some pictures of yourself and to keep putting forth and voting on suggestions for up and coming videos. Also, don't forget to like the videos that you enjoy guys so that I know what you want to see again. And speaking of that guys, next up will be some more social media videos and deep web stuff, as you guys seem to really like that kind of stuff. Thank you all once again for all of your amazing support. I'm honestly speechless. It's just crazy how fast this channel is growing, and you guys have just been so amazing. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new guys. The hive here is just buzzing, and all the mates here are just great, so yeah, you'll feel very welcome, and yeah, they're amazing. So just stick around and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you mates in the next video.